All right, good morning, Stockholm. It is incredible to be here. This is my first time actually in Sweden, and I am having an incredible time. As was already said, this talk is all about Adware as a service. So, my name is Sean, I'm a community organizer, and I just want to take a moment to talk about community organizing. I live in Chicago, and we have an incredible community. Communities are so important in the security world. What we're doing here today is absolutely incredible. PubSec, I think that's 6 months from now, is absolutely incredible that people do that. I really want to encourage everyone to just take a part in your local community to help strengthen it and to help encourage others to come out to local community events like this. So, I'm currently a senior security engineer at a company called SoundCloud. We're a music streaming service based in Berlin. And this talk is all about what I learned during my time as an employee at the largest digital marketing firm in North America. So, basically the premise of this talk is, are all digital adverts adware? Are all the advertising we see online, on your TV, is all of that adware? So, first we have to talk about how ad agencies have traditionally consumed most of the data that they utilize in their day-to-day. They do that with cookies. Cookies are fairly simple. Typically, they have a name, an encrypted value, an issuer, and then a couple flags tacked on to the end of that. And as you might be able to see on the screen, it says SSID on there quite a bit. They use that and all the history of your SSIDs quite frequently when tracking you throughout the web. So, we also have to talk a little bit about what is a first-party cookie and a third-party cookie. So this is a propaganda slide from a company that issues first-party cookies, but it does sum up third-party cookies all right. Essentially, third-party cookies are issued by advertising or other firms that then track you across the web and try and bring back as much information to those third parties as possible. First-party cookies are issued by companies like Google, Meta, also known as Facebook, and companies like that, and they just try and centralize their data back to them. So, there is some good, actually some kind of useful things about cookies, some bad, and some ugly things too. So, it's convenient, right? Keeping you signed in, fairly convenient. Maintaining your cart if you're not signed in, also, yeah, kind of practical to come back somewhere and realize, oh, gosh, I forgot to check out. Language preferences, fairly convenient. It is nice to be able to read what you're seeing on the screen. And something that's actually really, really practical is reducing server load. So that is done via just downloading like common assets into the cookie, and then those common assets are retrieved locally from your device instead of having to retrieve those assets for every single web page you visit. That does actually reduce server bandwidth, bandwidth on your local networks. It actually does reduce just energy use in general. That is a really good thing, and cookies are responsible for that. Then there's other things like preferred pickup location. It's kind of cool if your local store knows, okay, yeah, this is the store we recommend you check out at. But that's also kind of creepy, right? Like, why do you know that? I didn't agree to give you my location, but you have a preferred pickup location for a store that's, half kilometer away from me? Pretty creepy. And then the user's also bought feature. It's kind of creepy if you're adding things to your cart and they're like, yeah, look at all these other things that we also suggest you purchase. Makes me a little bit uncomfortable. Then there's preventing the GDPR banner from reoccurring, but that also doesn't work if you say no. And then there's customized ad preferences. Again, a little bit weird that they know what I'm talking about with my friends, that they know what I want to purchase. And then there's the really ugly. Hopefully, a lot of us are familiar with session token hijacking. It is still a really common issue. For the most part, there are ways that have been secured to prevent that and make it harder to do. That's great. There's also a lot of older websites still using session token cookies that aren't doing those new best practices. And then there is anger as a service. Because guess what? You are more likely to purchase something if you are unhappy. So a lot of digital adverts want to upset you or put you in an emotional state so that you are more likely to continue consuming more and more than you need. And then there is, by far the creepiest, studying user behavior. Not just from the advertising companies, but think tanks and other orgs placing ads, tracking how people respond, and then using that to further agendas. So, we need to talk a little bit about 101 for marketing. Marketing firms or ad agencies are companies that place and then track the ads. The advertisers are the people that are giving the money for the ads, or occasionally they place them themselves, but for the most part, advertisers are what you are seeing in the ad, whoever the ad is for. Then, how do ad agencies generate most of their revenue? So part of the revenue, all the revenue that they make from placing the ads, essentially their click-through rate is able to determine what kind of percentage of commission they can charge for placing of the ads. And then that's the smallest part of the revenue. By far, the largest part of the revenue is driven from secondary analytics services. So why is that so important? Well, a lot of those analytics services are driven by cookies. So if a large entity that controls 64%, I think, of the browser market decides, hey, what if we just kill cookies? That's not gonna make marketing firms all that happy. So because GDPR specifically targeted cookies in a lot of its language, especially third-party cookies and third-party data exchange, and then in combination with that, Apple and other companies started limiting what cookies could do on their devices, what cookies would have permission to see, and other cross-app, cross-platform tracking using cookies. Due to all of that, Google launched an initiative in 2020 that they were going to kill all cookies, all third-party cookies within Chrome. And they decided to call it Privacy Sandbox because doesn't that sound so consumer-friendly and so nice? So we're gonna sandbox your laptop. That is some great marketing. And they were gonna package that within the Google Analytics 4 rollout. So as I was saying, most third-party analytics services, most of the revenue that marketing firms were generating was from these cookies. And so they freaked out. This is a small portion of, if you Google death of cookies, just automatically it is just pages and pages of marketers ranting about this. So on top of the marketers, there was a lot of other entities, state actors, super PACs, think tanks. All of these use cookies to track engagement with misinformation or just information in general because they want to study user behavior, what keywords in ads, what keywords in articles drive additional user engagement, and they also want to learn what kind of words drive user disengagement, what decreases interest, because maybe some entities would find an interest in driving less people to vote. And they study a lot of this with something called post-release spread. When an article is published, how does that information blossom across the internet? When an ad is seen, how do users interact with that? All of this is really, really creepy, but also really, really interesting. I do actually recommend this book, The Rules of Engagement. I've never met the author. This is not product placement. It is really interesting. There are a whole bunch of National Health Services that have reviewed it and said, yeah, this is fairly scientifically sound. Within the book, they describe not just the spread of disease. Obviously, the book is based on what this person learned because of COVID and how disease spreads, but also it discusses how just information spreads across human populations and how it's so much harder to dispel a lie once the lie is already out there in the wild. So, with the death of cookies, privacy advocates were like, I don't know, man, that doesn't sound revolutionary. That doesn't actually sound like a privacy sandbox. Decreasing third-party cookies is only going to eliminate other people from accessing data, but it's going to strongly consolidate Google's monopoly on data and Facebook's monopoly on all of the data. And so it doesn't really seem like any sort of privacy win, because that data is still being consumed. It's just being consumed by a sole entity. Ad agencies, they had an issue, right? This drives so much of their revenue, so they put together tanks of just their most brilliant strategic minds, their most technical people, and they came up with a fantastic plan, a new type of tech. And I put new in single quotes because it's not actually new, they're just ingesting data via API. But they're doing it directly. So traditionally with cookies, right, the cookies would be placed on your browser, and then other websites would see the cookies in your browser and then ingest information from them. Well, what if we just bypass all that? Because with GDPR, that gets complicated. With third-party data transfers, that gets quite complicated. But what if it's not a third-party data transfer because you have a first-party partnership with Etsy, with Hulu, with Netflix, with Amazon? So you have a first-party partnership with these companies, and you just directly ingest all of your user information, all of your user analytics and behavior directly into your data platform. Well, then that's not a third-party data transfer, right? It's not going into the browser, so it's not a third-party data transfer. So it's totally fine. And then this is actually about cookies and what data cookies are consuming. That data is only clear with this, and there's even more, but it would be quite hard to list that much on a slide. So they're consuming all sorts of things. Primarily, they're consuming a lot of device fingerprints. They're consuming your SSIDs so they can track one device across multiple locations, so they can correlate, hey, this user goes to this location quite a bit, right? And these other users go to these locations quite a bit. Well, maybe these people are coworkers, right? They're going there 9 to 5 every day. Cool, we can build and log a relationship about these two individuals. Or these two individuals spend a lot of time together on the weekend. They spend, they sleep in the same building with the same SSID. So cool, maybe they are a family member. And they build massive, massive relationship databases to correlate people across different locations and to correlate just how they can influence one individual. Have you ever noticed how you Google something, or you talk to, not you Google something, you talk to a friend and you talk about this specific product or this specific thing, and then you start seeing ads for that on your phone and you're like, I didn't Google it. Well, they aren't listening to your conversations, because there's no need for that. It's much more invasive than that. They know who you spend your time with. They know that that person then went and Googled that thing. And so then, or even they know that someone in the same room as you Googled it. And then they start pushing ads about that thing to you because they know it is recently in your mind. So how does this data help them? Well, the number one thing they want to do is understand trends. They want to understand how things grow, how things spread, and what demographics are driving the growth and spread of trends. Yes, nothing beats a Jet2 holiday. I had a thing about Stanley Cups in here the other day, but obviously I had to replace that, right? Nothing beats a Jet2 holiday. So, who's driving that? Why are they driving it? Where did it originate from? What locations? Or is it teens in the US? Is it people in their 40s in Sweden, right? Where did it originate? And where is it growing? And they want to figure out where it's growing so they can latch on and start spending ad revenue in those areas, on those demographics. and then they want to learn the second a trend starts to die off, because then they want to pull all of their ads, because eyeballs are expensive. So if people are less likely to consume a product because the meme you're exploiting is dying off, well, then you don't want to advertise with that meme. You want to latch on to the next meme. So how does this help the marketers? Are two coworkers seeming flirtatious? Do they maybe want to go on a date? Maybe we should start pushing date locations to those people. Suggested activities, suggested restaurants for them to go to, things like that. Because every time those people are more likely to click on an ad that they see, that every click increases the revenue that marketers are making. Are a couple fighting a lot, right? Are these people clearly struggling in a relationship? Maybe we should push lawyers. Maybe we should push toxic masculinity podcasts, really capitalize on that. Or maybe we should actually help people and push therapy services, right? I'm not going to say online therapy services are the best. They're better than not going to therapy at all. Highly recommend therapy, right? Amazing. But that is essentially what they're trying to do. They want to drive people to click ads and make it as likely as possible that they are going to then click the ads. And these are all things on screen right now that marketers, this is directly from someone promoting server to server, these are all things that they called fantastic, that they called advantages of server to server over cookies. So why is implementation, why is it an advantage that it is complex to implement? Well, if something is complex to implement, that means the advertisers, the people paying for the ads, are less likely to then go and implement it themselves. So that is another third-party service that you can continue to make money on over time, that you can continue to use to drive your revenue, to make reoccurring revenue, right? Because we all know recurring revenue, blank as a service, is an unfortunate future that we're trapped in. Privacy harms. So why is all of this harmful? So there are two really incredible people, Professor Daniel Solov, who is a professor of human behaviors, and Adam Shostak, who designs threat models. He wrote Threat Modeling, Designing for Security, a really incredible book if you've never read it. Professor Solov has created these as privacy harms: information collection, information processing, information dissemination, invasion, and then Adam Shostak added to that identifier creation. These are all things that even just on their own can be potentially harmful for you, because they can enable things like blackmail, they can make you easily accessible, and they can be used to remove context and distort something out of the full picture of what actually happened or what someone actually said. We've all seen probably tons and tons of clips of someone saying something like, oh my gosh, I would never think that that politician would say that. No, they were directly advocating against that, but some other party decided to clip it right out of context and then is able to drive a point about that thing. So these are all harmful just on their own. But server to server tries to go a lot further, right? All of those were harmful with cookies and the old world. Server to server goes a lot further than with previous technologies, because previous technologies, cookies, often largely relied on towers to collect and tabulate the data. They relied on Facebook and Google to centralize it and then be able to distribute it with ease. But server to server has no regulation, it has no standardization, right? Ingesting data via API is not revolutionary, no matter what your branding says it is. But what's so harmful about it is these companies, there are dozens popping up all the time, doing it in different manners without being vetted, and these marketing firms are just buying services from all these data companies, and they've no idea what the reliability of them is. They have no idea how secure these platforms are, because these are just brand new. This is brand new industry, and it is pretty much the Wild West, and we've already seen quite a few leaks of different data, because these are companies that are just trying to capitalize on this in the moment, they aren't really here to stick around. So towers would also see a lot of this data as a liability, right? It is dangerous to keep all this really specific user demographic information. So instead, we'll just put user identifiers into pools of data, and then we can divvy out ads with that way. And they would purposely sanitize this. Obviously, this is not for our own good. This is to limit their liability for their lawyers, and then also anonymizing that information and then distributing out the anonymized demographics makes it significantly easier to retain your power if you are the person that gets to divvy up that data. So let's get a little bit ethical. So I have quite a few additional concerns. Ads are used to constantly fuel misinformation and emotional manipulation all across the world, right? Because if people are incited, if people are driven or scared, they are more likely to react. They're more likely to do something that maybe they wouldn't otherwise, or they're more likely to isolate themselves from others. Facebook was caught studying how to manipulate users and what emotional states to drive users into in order to make them the most likely to consume something. There was a leak, 2014. They studied 690,000 users, and that is what they were studying. And obviously, this is a leak. If they were already doing this in wide scale, and one of the things leaked, they're probably doing it in larger scale or doing other similar studies. Instagram had some leaks as well. Same company, obviously. Or in case you didn't know, same company. Meta is the parent company. Their leaks showed that they were debating internally, is it moral to cause depression in tweens? If you're not familiar with the term, that is people that are 12-ish years old. Because, morality is debatable, right? It might be fine to do that. Obviously not. This is horrible. But there have been constant leaks showing that they debated this internally. State actors, think tanks, all these people have been using these kinds of strategies since World War II, right? Because if you motivate a populace to fight a war for you, well, it is important to not get invaded by other countries, right? I think that's a great thing to not be invaded, but they used all sorts of things to motivate people to fight wars, whether it be the invaders or the invadees, because this was really popular. Propaganda was over radio waves, it was just in print, it was everywhere. And then what happened after the war died down? Well, there are all these people that specialized all these psychological tricks, all these psychological skills, and they suddenly had no job. And there was a lot of rebuilding to do, a lot of products to sell. So the advertising industry was already around, but it had a massive boom with all of these freshly trained people. So advertisers started using things like card stacking. Oh, 7 out of 10 dentists highly recommend this toothpaste. Okay, but who are those dentists? Why aren't you telling me more information? Why do they recommend it? What have they actually said on it? Is this a 2-second thing that you said, you just walked up to someone and said, how do you feel about this toothpaste? Or is this an actual study that those dentists ran? Bandwagon. All of your friends are doing this. You should hop on and do it too. It's super popular. Let's go on a Jet2 holiday. Transfer techniques. I feel this way about this. You feel this way about this. I also feel this way about this other thing. You should feel that too. And then, most of all, fear. If you are afraid of something, if you are afraid of your neighbor, then you are more likely to do something, whether it be go out and vote a certain way, whether it be go out and buy my product that will defend you against your neighbor. All these things are not just driven by consumerism and advertisers that want to sell legitimate products, but they're also driven by state entities who realize they can capitalize on using these techniques. Some additional concerns in 2024, Russia spent 15.5 billion US dollars on advertising. And that was within their national budget. This is fully disclosed from them in their own numbers. Only 1.8 billion of that money was spent within Russian audiences. All the rest of that was spent elsewhere. In the US, where I currently live, the last election, there was $15.9 billion just spent on that election on advertising. That doesn't include people's travel, that doesn't include other things, just on adverts. That is a fairly large sum of money. And at least $1.9 billion of that was completely unattributable to any individuals or any specific corporations. So, cookies, unfortunately, are still around. We still have those banners popping up. Google helped drive growth in the digital marketing world. Between them and Facebook, the two are largely responsible for modern digital advertising. They are their Frankenstein. But ad agencies were working with Google Analytics 4, and they were just unable to get the kind of results that Google promised. Google said, don't worry, your data is going to remain fine. You don't have to do anything about it. It's all cool. Buy our additional services for better insights. Even with those additional services, they were not getting the kinds of returns that they wanted. Click-through rates were plummeting. They were getting obscure data. They were mis-targeting demographics. And they were having massive, massive issues. To the point that ad agencies started directly calling Google out. They were telling them, both of us are going to lose really, really large sums of money if you don't make a change. And there were a few advertising CEOs that called Google selfish. They called them arrogant. They said they didn't want to admit to a mistake. Google disliked that. Google thought that they were, again, just being upset. They didn't want to roll with the modern times. They don't want to modernize. They don't want to help privacy grow, because privacy is great. So they started taking out hit pieces, calling ad agencies incompetent, calling them greedy, calling them selfish, saying that privacy is the way forward, it's what we have to do. They took out these hit pieces in massive magazines like Ad Age. Google Analytics 4 got delayed 4 times. It was supposed to be implemented in 2020. Finally, after 4 delays in January of 2024, Google threw up their hands and said, don't worry about it. It turns out third-party cookies are perfectly safe. They are perfectly private. Ignore all previous things we said. Don't worry about it. It's all good. So now, in today's day and age, cookies and server-to-server are living in harmony, producing more precise insights than ever before. They are fostering new incredible partnerships. Meta's Pixel, if you've ever seen a share on Facebook button, or just any button on the website that leads you to then Facebook, that is part of Meta's Pixel. That is how they track people across different places on the web, because if you are signed in to Facebook on your browser, if you see that button, it knows who you are. And then it knows that you read that article. This doesn't feel like the biggest victory, does it? Other partnerships, Google is now partnering with server-to-server technologies to distribute additional information using reCAPTCHA. Did you know that Google owns reCAPTCHA? Well, they're now integrating ad intelligence into reCAPTCHA, so any page with a reCAPTCHA can do the same thing that Meta's Pixel has been doing. And that just requires you to be signed in to your Google account for them to know it is you. So, thankfully, we can do something, right? We can tell people about this. I am here speaking to you here in the EU because GDPR is effective. They wouldn't be spending billions of dollars creating this new technology if there wasn't a need for it. It is highly effective. It terrified the ad agencies. It terrified advertisers. So it is amazing. It really is. But it's also broad in some areas and narrow in some other areas. So where do I think it's a bit broad? Within GDPR, there is something called the likelihood of risks to rights and freedoms. what does that mean? What is a likelihood to risk to rights and freedoms, right? That should be better defined. It really should have some clear guidance from the regulators. There should also be additional guidance around what is a reasonable level of protection. GDPR requires that companies that consume user data apply a reasonable level of protection. This one actually has some really, really massive movement right now between additional new governances like NIS2 that is providing a lot more clarity and guidance. And obviously that is yet to be ratified in a lot of the EU, but it is movement on it, and it actually has been helping, and I think it really will make some impact. And then there's implementations of informed consent. I think there needs to be clear directives about that. I think that it should be opt out by default, and there should be requirements that specific user information has to be checked for each one, instead of just, do you accept all ads? Cool, bye. Where's it narrow? So there's a couple ways that I think it's a bit narrow. It's focused on user data. It's not focused at all on the harms that can come from that data. I think it's really important to protect both and to focus on both, because the data can be used to harm people, and if it is, there should be additional regulation and protections for those potential harms. It's also a little bit obsessed with cookies. A lot of why they've driven to create this new technology is because cookies have been a big focus in GDPR, and with all this movement around there, they can just say, don't worry, it's not cookies, it's cool. And then obviously they're calling things a first-party data transfer or a second-party data transfer to avoid the term third-party data transfer, even though it clearly is that. And then, what is legitimate interest? From what I have seen, I'm not a lawyer. I work for a EU-based company. A lot of my knowledge is based around protecting my own company. But I've seen the term legitimate interest used in what I understand to be, and what I understand the purpose of it to be, is legitimate interest of a state entity or legitimate interest to protect individuals, right? If you want to track how a disease is spreading, that is a legitimate interest to retain data on the spread of a new potential disease. But what is not legitimate interest is to just specify that in the terms and conditions of your app and then say that we are fully excluded from GDPR because our business has legitimate interest in doing what we do as a business, just very vaguely. I saw that in a website's terms of service the other day. Some person came to me and said, hey, can we purchase the service? And I said, I'm going to send this to my privacy DPO because I do not think that is how that term is supposed to be defined. So, and then anonymization is great, but if it's re-identifiable, is it really anonymized? It only takes 5 data points to identify 98% of the population of the US or Europe. That's not a whole lot of data points. So if you can gather all those data points about a single individual, you can probably figure out who that individual is. Therefore, those data points are re-identifiable. We should protect against that. And then what are my individual recommendations, right? Privacy-friendly browsers, Firefox, great. It is not in, maybe there are other browsers that are not in people's best interests. If the founder of a company was fired for being homophobic, then maybe we shouldn't rely on his browser that is then funded by the founder of Palantir. I don't know if those two have my best interest in heart. So I don't know if I would really recommend that browser. Isolated profiles. There are all kinds of browser extensions in any browser you can use, right? If you have to use Chrome for work, you can use multi-account containers. Multi-account containers makes it so that for every account that you have, you can create a new container, which then makes your device harder to track, harder to re-identify, because it looks like a different browser for every account, and so they can't do the correlation between your Google account and your news article account. They can't do the correlation between Facebook and Etsy or all those other places where the meta pixel icon appears, right? Then there are all kinds of ad blockers that you can use. I really recommend ad blockers. They are not perfect, right? They're not the be-all, end-all, but used in conjunction with multi-account containers and VPNs, they can provide fairly strong protections. VPNs don't anonymize metadata, and honestly, they don't really anonymize you, despite what marketers from all kinds of VPN companies want to tell you. But used in conjunction with other tools, they can hide your SSID, they can hide your geolocations, and they can make you significantly harder to identify. And overall, if more people just started using these three things, their data would become a lot more scrambled and a lot harder for them to parse, and it would really, really mess up their world. Additional recommendations, ephemeral MAC addresses are fantastic. A lot of devices are ID'd by MAC addresses. Apple devices are already using this by default in both iPhone and MacBook. Those are occasionally messing with legacy technologies that would also do that. I know my Marriott Wi-Fi has broken a few times because it's seen the MAC address switch and then say, no, 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 you're doing something weird and we're going to ban you from the network. Those companies should really get over the hump and stop relying on MAC addresses so heavily. But yeah, ephemeral MAC addresses, fantastic. I also strongly recommend minimizing your use of corporate IoT devices, your smart fridges, your smart TVs, your smart thermostats. Those are all fantastic things. Well, I don't know about the smart fridges. I don't understand the point of one. But for the most part, those are fantastic things. They can really save your energy use. But there are really incredible open source options that you can utilize instead of just using the off-the-shelf ones, right? A decade ago, I tried to get into some of the open source options, and they were really, really buggy, and my partner was not very happy with me with how often those things would go down. They are a lot more reliable. They are a lot more user-friendly these days, so I really, really recommend looking into that field. You can utilize a Pi-hole. It's a simple device that you can run on your network. It isolates a fairly large amount of ad traffic, both into your network and out of your network. It stops a lot of the signals that get sent back to these advertising companies. Again, not perfect, occasionally breaks things, but really, really good to be used in combination with all these other strategies. So, those are everything I have to tell you about today. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. It is so fantastic to be here in Stockholm.
Brilliant. Great stuff. So we have, what have we got here? We've got 5 minutes for questions. If you have a question, please put your hand up and we will get you a microphone. Any questions? Oh yeah, we've got a couple over here. So we'll take this one. We'll take this one here first, and then this gentleman here in the back next.
Well, thank you for a great speech. I wonder, shouldn't we, as a community, really hack the system, to say? Isn't there like ongoing things for us as users to utilize for like getting them the wrong information and hack the system?
I think I understood you. Are you suggesting that we should utilize misinformation to just flood the advertisers? Perfect. Yeah, that is a fantastic idea. It is really, really interesting. I do this purposely, and unfortunately, I expose myself to a lot of advertising because I am trying to study how behavior manipulates these things and how my own behaviors can change what kind of articles I'm being suggested and what kind of products I'm seeing. It is really, really interesting what Instagram thinks I am day by day. It's really interesting what all these other platforms think I am day to day, just based on what weird things I feel like Googling in conjunction with each other, what weird websites I want to go to, right? Am I an 80-year-old person that really, really requires Depends? Am I a 12-year-old that is really hyper interested in Bluey? No, I'm a 30-year-old that is really hyper interested in Bluey, but I also have 3-year-old twins, so I watch a lot of Bluey.
This gentleman over here.
Hey, so the checklists that you had at the end for the personal recommendations, so they have an impact on how much you get tracked, but is there like a measurable impact about just how much that can block tracking, how much that reduces the profile that might be made of you? And is there a more advanced list after that?
It is often difficult to find what different companies think about you. Facebook, Instagram, Google all have a section that discloses what they think you are. And I know Facebook at least allows you to correct that information so you can optimize your own adverts. In case anyone here felt like wanting to do that. It definitely gets fairly far off using those techniques. I don't know if maybe they have better information internally that is right, and they're just feeding me additional misinformation. That could definitely be the case. But from what I've seen, it does seem to be fairly effective because these strategies that they use are fairly finicky and difficult to tune. So just adding little bits of segmentation and sandboxing of your different accounts and habits can have a really large impact on that tracking.
Do we have any other questions? Hands up. Okay, I have a question. How do you think we could apply emerging things like agentic AI to flood these guys with so much shit that they drown?
I think that if you had the tokens to burn and want to warm up the world a little bit, then you could do some really, really significant damage to their data points.
Okay, so that is an exercise for interested readers, viewers out there. I believe you have your homework assignment. We'll see you here on stage in this time next year, right? All right, thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you so much.
Round of applause, please, for Sean.